Hey folks, so we've got the white car up on the hoist now. We got the hood off it. And with this one, we're not going to take the engine out. We're going to leave it in place, and that means we drop the transmission below. So the engine we will have to tilt downward a little bit to slide the engine off. But one of the first things we did was get the battery out, get the air box, breather, air filter, all that stuff. We took we drained the coolant, not all of it, but half, maybe a third or half of it. That's so that we could get this upper coolant line off of the rad. We need to do that so we could get the two fans out. Probably only need to take one fan out, but the second fan will give us a little more room to work. And actually, now that I say that, we wanted the second fan out so we can get to that other training line, right?
Yeah.
So this transmission right here grenaded, the differential blew, and so we don't know the state of metal parts through it, and consequently there could be metal in the oil cooler itself. So what we're going to do is we took the cooler lines, the rubber lines that come off of the transmission cooler to the transmission. We took those off of the donor transmission and we put them on here. And now we're going to drive in nearly a full can of brake cleaner and pressurize that stuff to drive it all through the rad and blow out any debris that might be in the oil cooler. And then we'll turn the hoses around, or turn the direction of air around and blow in the other way, and hopefully we'll dislodge anything that might be in the oil cooler. And my friend Kevin here made a neat rig to do that, so that he comments so that it doesn't cause all the transmission fluid to blow out at once. It's just a basic pressure regulator on a short hose, and he can turn the pressure down on anything that needs it to be turned down. So that'll be great, and it'll allow us to blow that coolant out at or the transmission fluid out at a more controlled rate. So that's what we're doing now. Okay, so we're here with the car up in the air now. We started working underneath. The lower ball joint on both sides was detached, and that allowed us to swing the hub out of the way. The axle nut, or the axle pin, and then the nut was removed. And these axles were well lubed in the splines, so they pushed out nice and easy out of the hub. And once we swung the hub assembly out of the way, I've used the pry bar between the transmission and the axle CV joint, and on either side, and it just popped out just as easy as can be. And so both of those axles are ready to be removed. I guess one of them you just need to move it out of the way a little bit.
Yeah, but I'm wondering why that pops back in so easily. That's the side I think is damaged.
Oh, okay.
And I'm concerned because the other axle, the tone ring is
bad.
Shattered on it.
Well, maybe this one will be good when you pull it out.
I'm hoping. We also have that drain plug that's covered in.
Yep. So here's the drain plug that come out of this transmission, and there's normally crud on there, but this has some pretty good filing stuff there. Subframe, or
we're gonna take these covers off to access things.
Oh yeah.
To unbolt power steering hoses and things like that in order to be able to lower the subframe.
Okay.
What we find here.
Looks all right.
Looks all right. So
whatever that went into.
I'd love to see in there. That is my concern now. I'm
Okay.
gonna take a light and have a peek
And
inside.
here's this tone ring on the end of this passenger side axle, and this actually shattered and broke on the parts car, so it's good to see it healthy on that one. Oh, something looks ground right there.
That gear has fallen down into the bottom. Normally that would be centered and my axle would go right through it. But it isn't the case.
Okay, so we had the car up in the air. We did some work under the subframe. What was the last thing we took off?
The two axles,
Took them out, yeah. Then we did some
and we took off the front pipe.
front pipe, right. So front exhaust pipe we disconnected behind the catalytic converter and in front of the catalytic converter and lowered it down, and there it is out of the way. We were careful not to bend the front pipe because it is a flex hose, and we're also careful not to slam the catalytic converter around because they're pretty fragile too. So we get the car lowered down now to waist height again. And the steering rack bolts onto the subframe below. And so since we want to drop the subframe and we do not want to drop the steering rack, we have to unbolt the steering rack from the subframe and wire the steering rack up to something so that it doesn't fall down when we take the subframe down. How many bolts hold the steering rack to the subframe?
There are 4.
Okay.
And basically what I usually wire it to is I'll feed a wire around this outlet for the brake booster and go down and tie it around the pressure and return lines right at the steering, right here. I'll just,
You do it and I'll see it.
I'll whip it around here. Make sure I go on the other side of the brake lines.
So as you can see, it takes a bit of fiddling around to get the wire in place, but I'll show you after it's installed. Okay, so that's one of the power steering lines that goes around. It's a steel line. How heavy is the rack? Like 30 pounds?
Yeah, something like that.
So you're not going to stress out those lines.
No.
Okay. So it's behind both of those steel lines, actually.
And I mean, look at the wire we're using. It's not heavy duty, but
yeah. And so you twist it around, what's that, a vacuum line onto the brake booster?
Yep.
Okay. And there's a little play, but not too awful much there. So that will drop a bit, right?
Correct.
That's okay?
As long as it doesn't pull out of the shaft at the bottom of your rack and pinion, you're good. If it does that, you're in trouble.
Okay, so we'll avoid doing that. That'll be another video for another day, I guess. So on this side, what do we do?
That side, it just drops. It doesn't matter.
Oh.
All you're trying to do is stop it from coming out of the
Okay.
steering column.
So you just have the one side
The one
wire?
side wired up,
Okay.
and that's it.
And since we're up here, the other thing we did was the subframe. I'll show you when we get it up in the air again. We actually wired the subframe to the cross member, and cross member underneath the rad support, really. And we've got that tight there. And we are going to, what we don't want is to undo the bolts for the or for the subframe and have the thing fall to the floor. So we've got it tied there, and it's a noose at the end, so we can gently slacken that rope and lower that end. And on this end, this would be the corner closest to the driver's side steering wheel. We've got I'll zoom out. We've got a cheapo workbench with some 6x6 pieces of wood on top of it. And so we'll rest the other corner of the subframe here, and then we'll just gradually lift it up and remove these one at a time until we can get the subframe to the ground. So hopefully no drama. Not the end of the road. Okay, so we're underneath the car here looking at the steering rack, and of course that stays on the car. We are going to drop this big cross member here, but to prepare the steering rack to stay up there, earlier we showed you how to wire up the power steering lines up to the brake booster to keep the steering rack onto the steering shaft. And here we are, we've got
The complete rear mount of the motor removed.
yeah, that's right, thanks. So we took the rear motor mount right off. We took off on the steering rack on this side, we took off on the passenger side, we took off 2 bolts to hold that kind of U-shaped clamp on. And then on this side, there were also 2 bolts, very difficult to get at. And we had to, and we took the front mount off as well, right? Or just pulled the bolt out of it anyway. Yeah. Pulled the front pivot bolt out of it. And that allowed us to pivot the transmission forward and allowed us to get into these difficult to get at bolts in the steering rack. There was also a high pressure line right here that is on the passenger side. If you look at the passenger side, boot for the steering rack, well right in front of that is this 10 mil bolt that holds the bracket onto the high pressure power steering line. That held it onto I guess this bracket that that will drop with the subframe. So what's our next step, Kevin?
Our next step, we can start unbolting the actual subframe.
Okay.
I would start by removing these 2 bolts on both rear plates.
Yeah.
And then positioning this somehow here,
Yeah.
but allowing us to still access that.
Okay. So those are 14s and that's a 17?
Yeah. Actually, that's a 19.
Oh, okay. All right. And so I don't think that'll be a problem. We'll be able to get that sawhorse in there. So that's the sawhorse that we're going to put in place. And then what? After we do those 3 bolts on each side in the back,
Then we tackle these two.
and that's
now,
it?
Now, normally, if you're gonna lower one of these and it's in very bad shape, these bolts have a tendency of getting seized. You can get into major trouble with that. I know mine won't. But if you're gonna take them out and you're using an impact gun, make sure it's strong, and make sure that once you start turning the bolt, keep going until you get it out. Don't stop
Don't
for
stop?
any reason. Just go.
Why?
You stop, and then it just seizes in place, and you sit there going da 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 da, and then there's a captive nut, and then it goes, and it's all spinning inside the frame,
Okay.
and you're sitting there with the,
Nut spins inside the frame.
yeah. So you end up cutting the bolt, lowering the subframe, cutting a hole in the frame, removing the captive nut, and redoing some funky thing to,
And then re-weld the frame.
yeah.
Well, that's a pain. All right, well, we're not going to do that. Okay, to be continued. Yeah. Okay, so we dropped the subframe. It was interesting, but not too hectic. I don't like it sitting on top of your impact gun there.
It's just kind of cradling on it.
So again, we had a rope tied around that front rad support, and we took all the bolts off except for one in the back near closest to the driver's side steering wheel. One 19 mil nut was holding it on, and then that rope. That was the only thing holding it up. And then I took the nut off. I'd say we used this sawhorse here and a couple of blocks, and I don't know. I think that might have been just more hassle than it was worth. But anyway, that's how we lowered it down onto that. And then I took one of the blocks out and lowered it another 6 inches. And then finally I just pushed the sawhorse out of the way, lowered it to the ground on this corner. And then my trusty helper lowered the corner that's the front passenger side. We got it right to the ground. So now that it's down, a couple of things that we're going to point out. There were some metal, what were they, Kevin?
Rubber bushings.
Yeah.
There's one on every corner. And to keep an eye out, even if they come apart, they can still be stacked back together and put back on. It's
Okay.
not tragic if they come apart.
Okay.
But as you're lowering the car, these
Yes.
tend to catch on your rack and pinion and tend to drag it down.
Yeah.
All you need to do is bend it out of the way, like flip the plastic, like so,
Yeah.
and you'll get it around your rack and pinion steering.
Yeah, we struggled with that a little bit, or I did anyway, and then they freed up, and the whole subframe just dropped to the ground. So that's that. Okay, after much sore knee and knee problem infliction, we are taking another break to do some video to catch you guys up to where we are. So underneath, we took as many of the engine to transmission bolts out as we could, all the ones we could see. There's one tricky one on the front mount to the front rad support. There's a bracket, that front mount bracket. When you take that bracket off, it exposes another bolt. And we missed it when we had the engine and transmission out as a common unit. And we were trying to separate them. We thought we had all the bolts out, but behind that front mount there was one more that was holding the two together. So take that off. Get all the bolts out from underneath between the engine and transmission all along the bottom. Take the starter out and or take the starter bolts out, and then the starter can just kind of go back towards the engine and just hang there for a little bit. Remember to get that plastic little insert out of the way so you can get access to the flywheel bolts. And as you're working on the flywheel bolts, have your partner use a 22 mil socket on a ratchet to roll the crank clockwise direction and take each of the bolts out. And we're now to the stage where we're going to lower the car onto, lower it down quite a distance. We're going to raise that 3-ton jack quite a bit, and then set the bottom end of the transmission on that, and then we'll take it the last motor mount, right, on the
But before that,
driver's
we'll be
side.
supporting the engine.
Right. We'll be supporting the engine with a 4x4 post along there. So, okay, so we got the car lowered back down again, and we've got a 4x4 post on top of here. We've got some shims. These are just 2x4s on their side. Try to make that post level if you can, but it's not critical that it's perfectly level. And in order to prevent the post from sliding off of here, we've got this rain strip, weather stripping peeled back, and there's some natural holes in the firewall for the weather stripping to sit in. And we put a screw in the end of this post. The screw actually, the head was too big to go in there, so I just ground it. I just spun it around on a grinder to make the screw slightly smaller, and it fits in there. And now we're not worried about the post sliding this way. It's locked in place pretty good. We've got a chain that's pretty heavy duty overkill, but it's what we had. And there is a mount right beside the ignition coils that is connected to the engine that's pretty industrial. So we put a bolt and a nut through there to tie the chain on.
Be careful that nothing gets there and
Yeah.
you may damage your coils.
Right. Good advice. Yep. And then we actually have a little bit of slack in the chain right now, because what we wanted to do is have the chain there just so nothing would drop. But we took out the front mount, and we had a jack, just backing up, we had a jack underneath the transmission, so we raised the jack up to touch the bottom of the transmission, and raised it just a bit so we could see this mount release the stress on it. Took the bolt out of the mount, and then we took the bracket off, the front mount bracket, and now this is free, floating, and when we lower the jack, this chain will tighten up. And so that's going to allow, that's tilting the motor just a bit. We don't want to get too carried away because it may stress some of the other lines over there. And the other thing that Kevin told me to watch out for is between the fender and these pulleys, the alternator pulley and the lower crank pulley. I don't know if you can see in the camera, but there's a gap there. And we wanted to make sure that none of those pulleys came in any kind of serious contact with the frame rail or the fender. The inner fender. So so I'd say we're in good shape there. And what was the next thing you said, Kevin? You jacked it back up so that it's level again. The engine and transmission are level.
There are
we just have the
two remaining 17 mil head bolts at the top. That's the only ones holding the transmission in currently. Yeah. Which will be removed next.
The flywheel bolts we took out already. I don't know if I videoed that. I didn't, I don't think. But anyway, they come out. And after those two 17 mils come out, the thing should just separate easy, right?
Correct.
Famous last words, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And what
as we lower it, if we need to go down any further, we can take one out at a time.
Good idea, yep.
To bring it lower.
Yep. Yep, okay.
And the transmission will slide out this way. It's not going to be easy to put in or out, but it is doable.
Okay. And then we need to take a cover in there off. You said there's a plastic cover.
We need to remove that.
Right.
So that we have access to pulling the transmission out.
And also, while I was out slacking off and you were continuing to work, you took this bracket off by removal of two bolts that were inside the fender.
No, I did not take those out. This bracket is still
okay. Sorry.
there.
Yep. All right. And does that kind of come out or no?
I don't think we actually have to do it.
Okay.
We only had to do it on the removal of the other one because we pulled it up
okay.
rather than lowering it down.
I did take those rubber plugs out in preparation for those bolts being removed, but we can put those plugs back.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. So we raised the floor jack till contact at the bottom of the transmission, then took those two bolts out, and then lowered the floor jack. And as it lowered, the engine dropped down and became tight against that chain. And it came down just like that, perfectly balanced. We kind of got lucky, I'd say. And so we lowered the floor jack right to the floor with the transmission on it. And then we raised the car up, and now they're free. So the new one's going to go in exactly that easy, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so again, we're looking at the transmission, and as we're looking at this speed sensor here, we happen to notice crack in the block. You can see the nice shiny metal. It's actually cracked in a couple of spots. Cracked right there,
and a big
right
gaping
there,
hole,
and then the big hole. So maybe cracked other places, but that's at least part of the reason why the fluid puked out all over the place. You see anything else there?
No.
And maybe related to why that gear inside was rolling around when you pulled that axle in, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is going to the junkyard anyway.
That's it.
Okay, so when we pulled the torque converter out to try and make this a bit lighter so that we could more easily move it, we found another nice hole in the side. So something blew through there, a gear let go or something. And we can only assume there are chunks like that all through the whole thing. So anyway, pretty catastrophic. That's probably the limit of our diagnosis, eh, Kevin? We're not gonna tear this thing
Yeah,
down.
no, that's going
Yeah.
into the junk.
Yeah, but basically, the housing exploded or something caused it to break, and that was ultimately the reason. That probably was the reason why the fluid leaked out, that hole in there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because these other spots are too high. But never know, they might have been sprayed while you were driving. Okay,